The lake shimmered under the golden hour light, its surface rippling with soft waves that lapped gently at the grassy shore behind our house. No roommates, no deadlines, no lectures, just stillness. That's why, on his second morning home, he grabbed my dad's old fishing rod from the garage. Of the water, he wasn't even fishing to catch anything. He just wanted to sit, think. That's the kind of person Danny is: quiet, reflective, a little stubborn when he thinks he's right. Which, in this case, he absolutely believed he was. The lake, in his mind, was ours. We'd grown up with it, fed ducks there, ice skated when it froze over one freak winter, thrown in sticks for our dog to chase. He thought nothing of casting a line into water. He'd played beside his whole life. But this wasn't the same neighborhood anymore. It was supposed to bring community, harmony, and property value protection. But mostly, it meant endless emails, seasonal yard inspections, and an army of rule-wielding retirees patrolling the sidewalks on golf carts. We weren't even sure how it all passed. Most families didn't read the fine print on the mailers. Until it was too late, and since then, things had only gotten more controlling. So there Danny sat, legs crossed at the edge of the grass, earbuds in, rod resting in his hands as dragonflies buzzed around him. I saw him from the kitchen window and smiled. He looked so at peace, exactly how someone should feel in their own backyard. With the sound of tires crunching gravel, a white golf cart pulled up near the walking path that curved along the back lots of the houses. I recognized the driver instantly. Mrs. Doreen Kessler, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of neighborhood order. She wore the same wide-brimmed hat she always did and carried her HOA binder like it was the Constitution. She spotted Danny, didn't even look at me, just waved a hand and shouted back, "Private lake use is restricted under Section 4B of the HOA covenant. Fishing without HOA-issued permits is a violation," she repeated, pointing at him with a trembling finger. He turned, confused. "We live here. This part of the lake touches our land. It's literally part of our property. That lake is HOA maintained." Of all this nonsense, "Are you serious right now?" That's when she said it. "I'm calling the police." She had the police on speed dial for everything from teenagers skateboarding to a neighbor once leaving their trash cans out on the wrong day. 5 minutes later, I heard it. The low wail of a siren in the distance, growing louder. Danny looked up at me, eyebrows raised. "You've got to be kidding me." I wasn't. This was happening. A quiet cruise into the cul-de-sac, followed by 2 uniformed officers stepping out with puzzled looks. I guess they were expecting something a bit more serious. Mrs. Kessler met them at the edge of her driveway like she was reporting a felony in progress. "He's still there," she said, pointing toward our backyard. "Still fishing. Permit." This is exactly what I told dispatch. He's violating HOA regulations, and he refused to leave when asked. Told there was a possible trespasser. "Yes," she insisted, "trespassing against the HOA rules. The lake is HOA property. That boy does not have lake privileges." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "He's in your backyard, but the lake, right?" The tall one cut in, sighing. "We'll go talk to him." From the deck I watched as they approached Danny, who had now reeled in the line and leaned the rod against the tree near the water. He looked perfectly calm, like he was talking to neighbors and not 2 armed officers. I hurried down the steps and jogged across the yard just in time to catch the conversation. "You live here?" one officer asked. "Born and raised," Danny said. "Came home from college 2 days ago. Thought I'd fish a little before lunch. You know, the HOA rules. I mean, I know they send out newsletters and whatnot, but we own this property. The lake literally touches our yard." A battlefield binder clutched tightly against her chest. "The lake is maintained by HOA funds," she declared. "Therefore, it is governed by HOA regulations. We've lived here since before the HOA even existed," I said firmly, standing beside my brother. "Our property line goes down to the water. Look it up. My dad has the survey. Documents. It doesn't matter," she snapped. When the HOA agreement passed, lake privileges became common area rights. That includes compliance with HOA access rules. You need a permit. "Your son, brother," I corrected. "Your brother Denny did not apply for one. He did not attend the orientation. He is in violation. I'm requesting a citation." The older officer rubbed his temples. "Handle this with the board or through legal channels. "He's disrespecting the bylaws," she insisted. "He's fishing," the officer replied, turning back toward the driveway. "Maybe cool off a bit." "Yeah." Mrs. Kessler stood speechless for a second before muttering something about escalation procedures and stormed back up the hill. "Welcome home," I said dryly, but the incident didn't just end there. That evening, an email landed in my dad's inbox titled "Urgent Notice of Violation, Unauthorized Lake Use." It included a blurry photo of Danny fishing and a scanned citation from the HOA board, threatening a $250 fine for violating original deed, plat map, and a signed property survey that proved our backyard and the slice of the lake touching it was technically on our land. It was a relic from before the HOA's creation, and apparently it made our lake access a gray area still, and we knew what was coming. This wasn't about fish anymore. It was about power, about territory, about the HOA trying to turn peaceful moments into policy debates. The next few days passed in a weird kind of limbo. Danny didn't fish again, mostly out of respect for Dad, who was trying to handle things the adult way. He gathered documents, printed out the plat map, and highlighted every property, boundary line in neon yellow. But underneath the paperwork and emails, there was tension like something waiting to snap. Then came Thursday morning. I remember it clearly because it was unusually quiet. The birdsong was sharp, the sky painted, soft pinks and oranges, and there wasn't a single lawnmower running rare for our suburban war zone of well-trimmed turf. Danny woke early, made a cup of coffee, and stared out the kitchen window at the lake. "She really called the cops on me," he said, shaking his head. "For fishing?" "Yep," I said, half laughing, "and she's still out for blood." There was a long pause before he turned to me with that familiar look, the same one he had before, sneaking out of high school dances or trying to build a treehouse with no nails. "I'm going back out there." "You're kidding?" "Nope. Quiet morning, no drama. I just want to sit, not even bait, on the hook." And before I could talk him out of it, he grabbed the rod, his mug, and walked back out to the edge of the yard like it was the most normal thing in the world. He took a seat in a foldable camping chair, cast his line into the waterhook glissande, settled into the moment like it belonged to him. I went back to scrolling my phone, half watching the clock and half waiting for something to go wrong. It didn't take long, 15 minutes later. The familiar squeak of rubber tires echoed off the sidewalk. Mrs. Kessler's white golf cart appeared like a ghost rising from the mist, stopping abruptly near the walking trail again. She didn't even speak this time, just picked up her phone and walked back and forth near the path. Gesturing toward Danny with exaggerated hand motions, I could tell right away she wasn't calling the HOA hotline. This was something else, something louder. When I heard the sirens, real ones, not imagination, I ran out onto the porch, heart pounding. A police SUV pulled into our street faster than last time, lights flashing. A second vehicle followed county this time, not city. It was surreal. All of this over a guy sitting by a lake. The officers stepped out, a little more alert than before, scanning the scene. Danny didn't even move. He was too calm, like he was waiting to be proven right again. "Sir," one of the officers called out, "can you step away from the water, please?" Danny stood, hands raised in surrender. "Sure, just to be clear, I'm not fishing, no bait, no hook, just holding the rod." "Do you have identification?" the other officer asked. I rushed down to meet them, my voice shaky with disbelief. "What exactly is the emergency?" Caller said there was a possible armed individual loitering near residential property, possibly violating HOA restrictions. Danny blinked. "Armed? Are you serious?" "I have a fishing pole. The only thing I'm armed with is patience." The officers glanced at each other, realizing the ridiculousness of the situation. One stepped aside to speak privately with Mrs. Kessler, who stood nearby with her arms folded and lips pursed so tightly they were nearly invisible. When the officer returned, his tone had softened. "All right, sir, no crime has been committed here. We suggest taking any HOA disagreements to civil court or your next board meeting. But maybe, for now, give the lake a break. Cool things down a bit." Danny nodded, more out of exhaustion than agreement as the officers left. The neighbors began to appear, some peeking through blinds, others stepping out onto porches. Word spread fast. Someone had called the cops again over a kid fishing in his own backyard. The whispers started, And not all of them were on the HOA's side this time. The lake, it seemed, had become more than a body of water. It was now a battlefield, and the entire neighborhood was starting to pick sides. Friday evening arrived like the calm before a storm. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. in the community center at the end of the Subdivision A beige, overly air-conditioned building that usually hosted birthday parties, Zumba classes, and passive-aggressive bake sales. But tonight, it was war zone ground zero. Dad wore his "I do not have time for this" button-up shirt and carried a manila folder stuffed with property records, plats, and a printed-out email chain. Danny came too, though mostly for moral support, and probably just to see how far the madness would go. I tagged along because by that point, it felt personal. We arrived to find the room already half full. Folding chairs were arranged in awkward rows, with a long plastic table at the front where 5 HOA board members sat like judges at a county fair. Mrs. Kessler, in the middle, wore her signature wide-brimmed hat indoors, like some kind of monarch. The projector screen behind them read in bold font, "Community Code Enforcement, Emergency Session." The murmuring stopped as we entered. All eyes shifted to us, the family who had committed the unspeakable crime of interacting with nature. Mrs. Kessler wasted no time. She stood and tapped her Gavola reel, one she insisted on using for all meetings against, a small coaster. "We are here tonight to address a matter of urgent non-compliance regarding improper usage of community-maintained water features and the enforcement of Section 4B of the HOA Covenant." Her eyes flicked to Danny. A resident was witnessed engaging in unauthorized recreational fishing without the appropriate permissions. Law enforcement was contacted on 2 occasions. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A man in the back coughed loudly and muttered something about wasting taxpayer resources. Dad stood slowly. "If I may..." Mrs. Kessler gave a tight smile and gestured toward the microphone. "My name is Greg Sanders. My family has lived here since before the HOA was even established. Our property deed clearly shows that the section of the lake bordering our backyard falls within our parcel." "I have the documentation here," he said, holding up the folder. "We were never notified that our personal access to the lake would be reclassified as common area, and frankly, I don't believe the HOA has the authority to restrict use of private shoreline." Someone clapped once awkwardly before stopping. Mrs. Kessler frowned. "Mr. Sanders, when your household signed the HOA agreement in 2019, you consented to all policies and bylaw changes, including those related to shared water features." Dad didn't blink. "We never signed an agreement that redefined the lake boundary. There was no public vote. You can't impose new restrictions without a transparent amendment process. That's when things turned chaotic." An older woman in the front row raised her hand and stood. "Honestly, I think this whole thing is ridiculous. We've all let our kids fish in that lake for years. Now you're calling the police over it?" Another man stood. "My son got yelled at last summer for skipping rocks. Are we going to start issuing fines for looking at the lake now?" Voices rose, hands went up, and suddenly the board table was under verbal siege. People were arguing, some defending the HOA's position, others venting years of built-up frustration. Someone brought up mailbox paint color restrictions. Another mentioned that their lawn gnome had been flagged for violating visual harmony. Danny leaned over to me and whispered, "This is way more entertaining than I expected." Mrs. Kessler pounded her gavel 3 times, but no one was listening. The room had cracked open, and all the petty grievances the neighborhood had bottled up for years spilled out, like a dam had burst. The meeting ended in confusion. No vote. No conclusion. Just a vague promise to review the bylaws and consider the unique circumstances of specific properties. As we left, several neighbors nodded at us, some even stopping to say, "Good for you," or "That was long overdue." It was the first time in years I felt like people were waking up not just to the absurdity of the fishing incident, but to how power had been quietly pulled out of their hands. Danny didn't say much on the walk home, but I could see it in his face. He was going to fish tomorrow. The next morning was still and quiet, almost suspiciously so. The air was thick with the kind of calm that usually came before something messy. The lake looked just like it always did, glassy, serene, reflecting the pale blue sky and cotton ball. Clouds above, But it didn't feel the same anymore. It had become something else now, a symbol, a line in the sand. Danny didn't say a word during breakfast. He just drank his coffee, tied his hair back, and walked out onto the back deck with the fishing rod in one hand and a small folding chair in the other. Dad gave him a nod from the living room, like an unspoken approval. He knew we all did. This wasn't just about casting a line anymore. This was about standing his ground. As he stepped down onto the lawn, I followed, keeping a small distance. Behind, he reached the lake's edge, opened his chair, and sat down slowly. Then, with practiced ease, he cast his line out into the water. No bait, no hook, just the act of fishing itself. For 10 whole minutes, nothing happened. No golf carts, no sirens, no angry HOA gavel. Just the breeze through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. And then footsteps. From the side yard appeared Mrs. Kessler. Binder in hand, sun hat tilted forward like a battle helmet. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her were 2 other board members, a husband and wife duo who rarely spoke at meetings. They looked unsure, cautious. "I thought we made it clear at last night's meeting," Mrs. Kessler said, arms crossed. "The lake is governed by HOA regulation. You are in violation." Danny turned his head slightly but didn't stand. "And I thought it was clear that my family owns this section of the shoreline. I'm sitting on private property fishing in water that touches it. No hook, no harm, just peace." "It's not about the hook," she snapped. "It's about setting precedent. If we let this slide, others will follow. There will be chaos, disorder." The irony of her using the word chaos to describe a guy quietly fishing was so absurd. I almost laughed. One of the board members behind her, Mr. Dalton's, "Up, Doreen. Maybe we should cool it for now. There are more important issues the board needs to handle." And, ... we kind of looked into the property line thing. He might actually be right. She turned to him sharply. "So, we're just going to let people do whatever they want. Disregard policy. Undermine the HOA." "No," he said, holding up a hand. "But maybe we let this one go. It's a fishing rod, not a rebellion." Danny stood slowly, rod still in hand. "No offense," he said, "but if you think this is what rebellion looks like, you might need to get out more." She huffed, clearly realizing the tide was turning against her. The moment hung there awkwardly, just a kid standing on his owned lawn, and a woman with a binder full of bylaws, slowly losing control without another word. She turned and walked off, the other 2 trailing behind. No threats, no citations, no police. That afternoon, Dad made a few calls to a real estate attorney, to a couple of neighbors who were quietly fed up with the HOA. He started printing flyers for a petition to formally revise several of the lake use rules and call for a vote on reducing the HOA's overreach. Within a week, over 30 households signed. It turned out the lake was only the spark. What people really wanted was something they hadn't had in a long time, a say in their own neighborhood. And Danny, he kept fishing. Every morning, sometimes with bait, sometimes without, but always with purpose, because it wasn't just a fight about a rule. It was a reminder, some things peace, quiet, your own backyard shouldn't need permission.